The night has a way of turning honest work into something that looks like a crime. Out here, the dark is not a curtain. It is a substance. It presses down on the hood of the truck and the shoulders of the men standing beside it, and it holds the sound close. Every cough, every boot step, every nervous laugh that tries to pass for courage. The basin is cold enough to make metal complain. The air smells of sage crushed under tires and diesel spilled from a red plastic can that won't ever stop leaking. There is a thin wind sliding along the flats, nosing through greasewood and rabbit brush, tugging at the loose ends of a tarp like it's trying to hear what's underneath. Above, the stars are sharp, in different points. No moon worth mentioning, just the black. A backhoe sits with its arm raised like a praying mantis, frozen mid-blessing. Its engine ticks as it cools, little metallic pops, as if the machine is talking to itself about what it has done and what it might still be asked to do. The bucket is caked with pale soil that came up in slabs and crumbs, the way earth comes up when it hasn't been disturbed in a long time and doesn't appreciate being disturbed now. The men have dug a clean-edged wound into the ground, a rectangle that looks too deliberate to be accidental. Someone has measured it, someone has squared it off. The corners are right angles, the walls sheer. This is not a hole made by erosion or chance. This is a hole made by intent. In the spill of work lights, 2 portable halogens on a tripod, the dirt has different colors like meat. A lighter top layer, dusty and brittle. Beneath it, a darker seam. Beneath that, rock that breaks wrong. The kind of stone that doesn't want to be pried apart. The kind of stone that makes men start talking about things they wouldn't bring up in daylight. There's a chain running down into that darkness, links thick as a thumb, oily to the touch. It has been fed over the lip of the hole slowly, with gloved hands, as if they were lowering something alive. The chain is hooked to something you can't see. A box, a lid, a slab, a promise. The men on the surface lean forward, faces washed out by the lights, their breath fogging and then disappearing. One of them wipes his palms on his jeans, though he's wearing gloves. Another holds a flashlight like it's a weapon. Someone keeps looking over his shoulder into the brush, scanning the empty land as if emptiness could step out and introduce itself. They say the place is cursed, that it's got a history older than the county records and meaner than the men who bought it. They say people have heard voices under the ground, whispers in languages nobody speaks anymore. They say there are lights that float without a source and footprints that end where nothing begins. They say the ranch has swallowed equipment, swallowed time, swallowed men's certainty, and that every time you get close, close to the gold, close to the story, close to whatever it is that keeps drawing people back, something happens that feels like warning. It makes a fine legend, the kind you can tell around a fire with your hands warmed and your back to the dark, the kind you can sell to strangers who have never felt what it means to stand alone on private land in the middle of nowhere and realize how small the human body really is. But the truth, when you stand here with diesel on your boots and grit in your teeth, is not supernatural. The truth is paperwork and cash flow and pride. The truth is that a rumor can be worth more than a fact if you can get people to repeat it. The truth is that men will dig holes in frozen ground at midnight because hope has turned into a debt and debt has turned into a deadline. A generator hums. A radio crackles with nothing. Somewhere in the distance a coyote calls, and for a moment the sound is so lonely it feels like accusation. The backhoe's engine is started again. The exhaust comes out in a thick breath. The operator, face hidden under a cap and the brim's shadow, puts one hand on the lever and one hand on the wheel like he's steadying himself. The chain takes up slack with a slow metallic rattle. Then it goes taut. You can hear it sing, a high, tight note that makes the hair on the arms stand up. The men go quiet, not because they are respectful, because they are listening. There is always a moment like this, right before the earth gives up whatever it has been holding, a moment where the mind tries to bargain with itself. If it's treasure, it will justify everything. The fuel, the nights, the fear, the arguments at the kitchen table, the people you lied to when you said it was just a hobby. If it's nothing, then it will be proof. Not that the legend was false, but that you were foolish enough to believe you could be the exception. The chain groans. The machine strains. Dirt trickles down the walls of the hole like dry rain. The lights throw hard shadows that make every rock look like something waiting. One man mutters a prayer that isn't for God so much as it's for luck. Another man smiles, but it's the kind of smile you see on gamblers when the card is turning and they can't stop it. And then the ground answers, not with a ghost, not with a voice, with resistance, with physics, with the old brutal fact that the earth does not care what you want. There is a shift, subtle, like a breath held and released, a sound like stone grinding against stone, and the chain jerks so sharply the hook rattles against the backhoe's bucket. Everybody flinches as if the hole has snapped at them. In that instant, diesel smoke hanging, wind scraping the brush, men frozen under white lights. You can feel what this place really is. Not a mystery, but a mirror. It reflects back whatever you bring to it. Greed, fear, faith, ego. It amplifies it. It makes it loud enough to mistake for destiny. Because the question was never whether there is gold down there. The question is what men become when they believe there is. Was this ranch marked by some ancient curse carried north with stolen treasure and blood-soaked prayers? Or is curse just the story America tells itself when the bill comes due for wanting too much, too fast, and pretending the wanting is holy? If you're here for this kind of slow, uncompromising depth, make a pact with me. The algorithm hates stories that take their time and tell the whole truth, but subscriptions keep them alive. Subscribe, and we'll keep digging where the light falls off. They say Aztec gold ran north like a frightened animal. They say it came up out of the Valley of Mexico in the early 1500s, stuffed into rawhide sacks and dragged through deserts that don't forgive thirst. They say it crossed rivers on the backs of mules and men, and that somewhere beyond the last reach of the Spanish crown, it was hidden in a cave so deep a torch won't find the end of it. It's a clean story, dramatic, ancient. It gives the land a pedigree, and it gives the search a righteousness, as if the treasure is not being stolen a second time, but simply recovered from the clutches of fate. The reality is colder and more American. The reality is that Aztec gold is a phrase that behaves like currency even when there isn't a single ounce of gold to show for it. It changes hands. It buys attention. It buys excuses. It buys men the right to dig holes in the earth and call it destiny instead of obsession. The truth is that most treasure stories don't begin with a map. They begin with a mouth. Somebody talking in a bar, somebody whispering at a kitchen table, somebody selling a dream to somebody who needs one. The land itself doesn't help. It invites the imagination the way a blank page invites a lie. Blind Frog Ranch sits in northeastern Utah, in the country that spreads out between the Uintah Mountains and the state line like a fist unclenching. The ground there is a hard, pale tan, broken with sagebrush and rocks that look like bones. You can stand on the flats and see long distances, miles of empty, until the horizon folds up into ridges and mesas and the blue-gray line of higher country. It is not the red rock postcard Utah people sell to tourists farther south. This is older, meaner terrain, oil and gas terrain, cattle terrain, places where the wind has been rubbing the same corners of the world smooth for 10,000 years. And the sky is big enough to make you feel watched. You don't need a curse to make a man nervous in a place like that. All you need is the knowledge that there are pockets in the West where the rules soften at the edges, where distances stretch law enforcement thin, where a boundary fence is sometimes the only line between you and a stranger who believes the story as much as you do. You can taste it in the air out there, dust and dry plant oils and the faint chemical edge of mineral, the smell of a land that has been taken apart layer by layer by people who believed something valuable was underneath. By the time the Blind Frog Ranch legend becomes a modern thing, it is already an old thing. The Aztec gold narrative has been circulating for generations, hitching rides on different vehicles, conquistador gossip, frontier tall tales, pamphlets, magazine articles, late-night radio, internet forums. In different versions, it gets anchored to different geographies: Arizona canyons, New Mexico mesas, Colorado gulches, Utah basins, because the story doesn't need accuracy. It needs emptiness. It needs places where a man can point at a ridge and say, "It's there," and nobody can prove him wrong without spending their own time and money trying. So, when you hear it tied to a particular ranch, a particular patch of ground, it feels specific. It feels like it's finally found a home. But what's really happened is that the story has found a new market. Look at the mechanics of it. In the late 20th century, through the 1980s and 1990s, Americans lived through a peculiar double hunger. The old industries of muscle and manufacturing start to thin out in places, jobs migrating or vanishing, while a new appetite grows for speculation, paper wealth, investment fantasies. Gold itself becomes a kind of moral refuge, a hard thing you can hold when you don't trust banks or politicians or the future. There are runs on precious metals. There are mail-order coins. There are radio hosts talking about end times. There are people building whole identities around the idea that the world is a con and only a few see through it. And in that psychological climate, a story about lost gold isn't just entertainment. It is a solution. It is a promise that the universe still hides jackpots for the faithful. By the early 2000s, the internet takes that hunger and gives it speed. Legends that once took decades to migrate can now travel in an afternoon. You get message boards and chain emails and grainy photos posted as proof. Somebody says their uncle saw something in 1973. Somebody says there's a cave entrance disguised by brush. Somebody else says the cave is guarded by men, by government, by something older. The story accumulates details the way a snowball accumulates dirt. None of it verified, all of it vivid. This is how Aztec gold becomes what it always becomes, a magnet. And magnets don't just pull in dreamers. They pull in the kind of person who understands that even the rumor of treasure can be monetized. You don't have to find gold to profit from gold, not in America. You just have to control the narrative, control access, control hope. By the time Blind Frog Ranch enters the public imagination, it is not simply a place. It is a stage. It is an address you can sell. A set of coordinates that can be dangled like bait. The geography does half the work. Remote enough to feel secret, rugged enough to feel dangerous. Close enough to roads and towns to be reachable with a truck and a weekend's worth of fuel. And the era matters, because the modern treasure hunt is not a man with a pickaxe and a mule. It's equipment rental rates and liability insurance. It's backhoes and excavators and shipping containers. It's a satellite map on a phone screen and a drone buzzing over the brush. It's the consumer version of excavation, where the romance is ancient, but the logistics are pure 21st century. In older treasure stories, the first step is a map. In this one, the first step is belief. Belief is a renewable resource. You can harvest it from strangers without ever paying it back. Somebody hears about Blind Frog Ranch and they don't just hear a name. They hear a set of implications. The word ranch carries its own mythology. Fences, horses, men in hats who know the land like scripture. It makes the story sound grounded, as if the treasure isn't just in the wilderness, but on a deeded piece of property with boundaries, a place that can be owned and controlled. The blind frog part sounds like folk magic, like a warning encoded in a joke. It feels like the kind of nickname a place earns by surviving something that should have killed it. And then there's the most useful ingredient, the curse. A curse is an elegant business strategy because it explains failure before failure even happens. If you dig and find nothing, it wasn't your incompetence, it was the curse. If you dig and the equipment breaks, it wasn't your planning, it was the curse. If men show up in the night and cut fences or threaten workers, it isn't your publicity attracting trouble, it's the curse defending itself. The curse turns every setback into evidence and every accident into prophecy. It makes the story self-sealing. Was it superstition or was it insurance? That's the first binary question, the first door into the labyrinth. Because in the American West, myths often arrive with invoices tucked into their pockets. The curse sells the thrill. The gold sells the justification. The land sells the illusion of permanence. And in between those things, you can build an entire economy of attention. But there's a deeper truth hiding in the legend's ribs. The Aztec gold story is not really about the Aztecs. It's about America's relationship with other people's wealth. About a nation raised on extraction. Timber, fur, silver, oil, learning to see the ground as a bank account and the past as a scavenger hunt. The Aztec Empire fell in the early 1500s, and with it fell a world of art and ritual and human lives measured in sacrifices and tribute. The Spanish arrived with steel, horses, smallpox, and bookkeeping. Gold became not just metal, but moral permission. It funded conquest. It bought ships. It bought palaces and wars. It became the language of power. And when that gold vanished, stolen, melted, buried, lost, its absence became a new kind of power, the power of possibility. Centuries later, in a basin in northeastern Utah, men stand under work lights and talk about Aztec treasure as if it is still waiting for them, as if time is a simple line and not a graveyard of broken civilizations. They say it is theirs to recover, because they can reach it first, because they have machines and leases and the nerve to keep digging when others stop. But the reality is that what they are really mining is the same thing that has always been mined in this country: belief. The belief that fortune is hidden somewhere and the right man can take it. The belief that land exists to be opened. The belief that history is a resource. And once that belief takes root, it doesn't need facts to grow. It only needs hunger. The legend of Aztec gold doesn't begin with a king. It begins with an economy, with men who know how to turn mystery into momentum and momentum into money, with a place remote enough to hide its secrets and accessible enough to sell them, with a story ancient enough to feel sacred and flexible enough to be reinvented every time it fails. And it begins, as so many American epics begin, with somebody looking at a stretch of empty land and asking a question that sounds like hope but is really a wager. Is there something down there? Or is there only us, digging, believing, and calling it destiny? They say the ranch was born haunted, that the curse was waiting there in the sagebrush like a rattlesnake coiled under a rock, patient through centuries, saving its venom for the first man foolish enough to bring a shovel. But land doesn't start cursed. It gets cursed the way a man gets hard, by weather, by hunger, by what he's forced to do to make a living. The curse is not a spell. The curse is a ledger. It is the tally of everything that's been taken and everything that's been promised and everything that's been buried, because it was easier to bury it than to admit it. Before it was a ranch, this country wasn't a possession. It was a corridor. Northeastern Utah Uintah Basin country sits like a shallow bowl under the long spine of the Uintah Mountains. The air out there carries dust and resin and the faint bite of mineral. In summer, the heat rises off the flats and shimmers, turning distance into a mirage you can't quite trust. In winter, the cold has teeth, and the wind slips down off the high country and takes whatever warmth you forgot to guard. The vegetation is low and stubborn: sage, greasewood, rabbitbrush, plants that learned a long time ago how to live on almost nothing. Water is the true currency. Creeks and draws, seep springs that come and go, snow melt that vanishes into thirsty ground. A man can cross miles and never hear a sound that isn't made by his own body. And yet, people moved through it. They always have. Long before any county clerk stamped any paper, there were lives set to the seasons: camp, hunt, gather, move. Knowledge measured not in acreage, but in memory, where the water holds late into August, where the antelope run when the storms come, where the ground turns slick after a thaw. The West loves to pretend this kind of land was empty. Empty is a word that does a lot of work for people with ambition. Empty means unclaimed. Empty means unguarded. Empty means guilt-free. But the basin was not empty. It was simply not written down in the language that would later be enforced. Then the country changed its mind about what land was for. You can feel the shift in the bones of American law. In 1862, while the Civil War was still grinding men into mud back east, Congress passed the Homestead Act, offering settlers the chance to claim 160 acres if they lived on it and improved it. A neat number, a rectangle that fits nicely into a dream. The myth says it was generosity, a nation handing out opportunity. The reality is that it was a machine for converting space into property, turning grass and water and migration routes into surveyed squares that could be taxed, sold, inherited, defended with a gun. Out here, a survey line was the first incision. The men who ran those lines did not come wearing myths. They came with chain and compass and later theodolites, sweating under broad hats, chewing dust, hammering stakes into ground that did not care. Their measurements were not poetic. They were ruthless. A section 640 acres, a grid imposed over a living landscape like a net. Corners marked, boundaries declared. And once a boundary exists on paper, it begins to exist in men's minds. That's when trouble starts, because a boundary is a promise you can fight over. As the 19th century rolled into the 20th, the West learned new appetites. Not just grass for cattle, but minerals. Not just minerals, but leases. Not just leases, but the idea that everything under your feet might be worth more than everything you can see. In 1872, the federal government passed the General Mining Law. 1872, a year stamped into the foundation of American extraction, inviting citizens to locate mining claims on public land. The law spoke in the language of freedom and enterprise. The ground heard it as permission, a legal blessing for men to turn mountains inside out, to chase veins of ore like veins in a wrist. The mythology says the West was tamed by rugged individuals. The reality is that it was tamed by documents and by the labor of men who rarely owned anything but their own exhaustion. You could see them if you stood on a ridge in those years, small moving dots on a wide land. Riders pushing cattle, wagons creaking, herders sleeping light because wolves and thieves don't announce themselves. And beneath that romance, beneath the cowboy silhouette, was the arithmetic nobody liked to say out loud. Grazing requires land in quantities that make a human life look ridiculous. One bad season, and a man can lose a herd. One harsh winter, and the carcasses lie in drifts like discarded furniture. Cattle don't respect boundaries, but businessmen do. So the fences came. Barbed wire is a quiet revolution. It doesn't roar like a gun. It just appears one day and changes what is possible. A fence turns a corridor into a trap. It turns passing through into trespass. It turns disputes into court cases and sometimes into funerals. It also turns land into collateral. A fenced property can be valued, borrowed against, sold. This is the true alchemy of the West, making dirt behave like money. And when too many men started treating open range like a free buffet, the federal government stepped in, not to end exploitation, but to regulate it. In 1934, the Taylor Grazing Act tried to bring order to the chaos of overgrazing and range wars. Grazing districts, permits, fees. On paper, it looked like restraint. In practice, it was another system of access, another set of gates, only this time the gates were made of bureaucracy. And still the land kept its own counsel. Even with laws and fences and leases, this country resists being simplified. The ground swallows tracks. Wind erases evidence. Distances make every decision heavier. You can be alone out there in a way that feels ancient, alone enough to start inventing reasons for your own fear. So imagine it. Before the cameras and the legend and the talk of cursed treasure, imagine the same basin with fewer names on it. A cold morning with frost on the sage. A man squinting into the sunrise, listening for cattle that might have drifted. The creak of leather, the click of a canteen buckle. Somewhere, a survey stake half buried in a wash, already leaning as if the earth is trying to shrug it off. Somewhere else, a wagon wheel rut hardening into history. This is what came first. Use, movement, work, quiet violence done to a landscape not by one dramatic act, but by 1,000 small ones. And it leaves marks you can't always see until later. Because every era lays down its own kind of treasure. Sometimes it's gold, sometimes it's oil, sometimes it's just the hope of profit. Enough to make a man look at a stretch of scrubland and see not emptiness, but potential. Enough to make him believe the ground is hiding something meant for him. The curse, if you want to call it that, isn't ancient magic. It's the moment a piece of earth stops being a place and becomes an asset. And once that transformation begins, it doesn't stop with fences or grazing permits or mining claims. It keeps going until the whole story is reduced to ownership. Who holds it? Who controls access? Who has the right to dig? So tell me, was this land ever truly found at all? Or was it simply claimed in ink, one signature at a time? They say treasure hunters live by instinct, by grit, by a man and a shovel and a sense for where the earth keeps its secrets. They say it's all sweat and luck and the clean honesty of work. The truth is that most treasure hunts begin under fluorescent lights, with a bored clerk and a stack of paper that smells like dust and toner. The truth is that the first thing a man buys when he buys land is not soil. It's a story written in legal language, and the story may already have villains in it. Out here, ownership is not a feeling, it's a filing. The courthouse sits in some small western town the same way they all do, brick or beige concrete, a flag out front moving half-heartedly in whatever wind the day can spare. Inside, the air is climate-controlled and too dry. It carries the faint perfume of old carpet, burnt coffee, and human impatience. There are chairs bolted to the floor. There are pamphlets nobody reads. There is a counter that turns people into numbers, and behind it, a woman who has heard every version of every dream. A man comes in with his hat in his hand, even if he doesn't mean any respect by it. He has the look of someone who's been staring at maps at night. He asks for records, deeds, easements, rights of way. He says the words like he knows what they mean, but you can tell he's only learned them recently, the way a person learns the vocabulary of illness when the doctor finally puts a name to it. The clerk pulls out books. These days it might be a computer screen, but the feeling is the same. A long chain of ownership, each link a signature, names written in ink that outlive the hands that signed them, the land reduced to parcels, and the parcels reduced to descriptions so precise they feel like prayers to geometry. Township, range, section. A language of squares. In the public land survey system, the nation laid over the West, a township is 6 miles by 6 miles. 36 sections inside it, each section 640 acres, a number as blunt as a hammer. From there, the land fractures into halves and quarters, 320 acres, 160 acres, 80. Neat cuts, measurable, sellable. The earth turned into math so banks can lend against it, and courts can argue over it, and men can kill for it without admitting that's what they're doing. This is where the first sin lives, in the assumption that land is one thing. Because land is not one thing. Land is layers, surface and subsurface, access and exclusion, water rights and mineral rights, grazing permits and road easements, airspace for a drone, a place to stand and a place to dig. Each one can be owned or leased or reserved by somebody else. A man can buy a ranch and still not own what's under it. And the ground does not care how surprised he is when he learns that. The clerk prints a sheet. It lists parcels and legal descriptions and a history that reads like a family Bible written by accountants. There are abbreviations that mean nothing until they mean everything. There are notes in the margins, little bureaucratic ghosts, reserved, accepted, subject to, words that don't sound like danger until they start costing you money. Somewhere in those lines, the West reveals itself for what it is, not a frontier, but a contract. A man might have come in believing he was buying solitude. He wanted sagebrush and silence and a gate he could lock. He wanted maybe a place where rumors of hidden gold felt possible because nobody else was around to laugh at him. He wanted a private world. But the paper tells him the world is already there. There's an easement for a utility corridor, some strip of ground, maybe 30 feet wide, that you can't block even if it runs across your best approach to the basin. There's a right-of-way, a road that isn't on the map he printed at home, but is on the map that matters, the one filed in a drawer in a government building. There are old leases that were signed when the country decided the West was a pantry, oil and gas, minerals, the subterranean economy that keeps its own calendar. In 1872, Congress passed the General Mining Law, and the West learned a new grammar of taking, claims staked, ground posted, and later the right to patent, turning public mineral land into private land priced at $5 per acre for one kind of claim, $2.50 per acre for another, as if the true value of a mountain could ever be captured in a figure small enough to fit on a receipt. It was a bargain written into national policy, and the West has been paying the interest ever since. Then in 1976, the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, FLPMA, put new rules on how public lands would be managed, how rights would be recorded, how the government would stop pretending it was going to dispose of everything and instead admit it intended to hold on. More paper, more gates, more ways for a man to think he owns the world until a clause reminds him he doesn't. All of this sits behind the romance like a skeleton. And it isn't just the federal government. It's the private world, too. The old ranch families, the developers, the companies that bought rights in bulk and held them the way gamblers hold chips. A man can own the surface and still wake up one day to the sound of trucks on what he thought was his land, because somewhere, years before he was born, somebody signed away the subsurface. It's called split estate, and it is one of the great quiet engines of bitterness in the American West. He hires a title company or an attorney, people whose job is not to dream, but to doubt. They open an abstract, every transaction back through time, hunting for problems like doctors hunting for tumors, liens, boundary disputes, old mortgages, claims that never got released, a forgotten signature that can rot a deal from the inside. The numbers arrive, and they don't care about poetry. An earnest money check, $5,000, to prove you're serious. A survey that costs more than the rifle you keep in the truck. Title insurance, maybe $100-200 just to protect you from the possibility that some dead man's paperwork comes back to life. Recording fees at the county office. Small, almost insulting, the way a toll is insulting when you've driven 100 miles to reach it. A few signatures and a notary stamp, and suddenly you are owner, as if a word can keep the wind out or the rumors in. And then, quietly, the sin. Not the sin of digging, not yet. The sin is thinking that possession is the same as control. Because the deed doesn't just confer rights, it also invites attention. It puts your name in a book, It tells the world you believe there is value here, enough value to spend money, enough value to bother with legal descriptions and fees and paperwork. And in places like this, value is a scent. It travels. It attracts. You can lock a gate, but you can't lock an idea. The man walks back out into the daylight with a folder under his arm. The air outside smells like exhaust and cold stone. The mountains sit where they've always sat. The basin sprawls, indifferent. He feels for a moment the clean thrill of ownership, the old American intoxication. He believes he has done the sensible thing first. He believes he has bought the right to dig. But a stack of paper is not a shield. It is a signal. And once the paperwork is done, once the ink is dry and the land has been turned into an asset with a name attached, what comes next? Was he buying a piece of ground? Or was he buying the first stake in a story that money itself would come looking for? They say the hunt turned serious when somebody found a map, aged paper, curled corners, ink browned like old blood. They say a man unfolded it on the hood of a truck, and the wind tried to steal it, and the coordinates lined up like fate. They say the land called to them, that it chose them. The truth is less flattering. The truth is that the myth didn't become real until money showed up with its sleeves rolled down and its pen already uncapped. Out in the Uintah Basin, a rumor can live for 100 years and never cost anybody anything. It can be told for free at a bar. It can be laughed at for free at a kitchen table. But the moment you decide to dig, truly dig, you cross a line. You stop being a listener and become a spender. You step into the part of the story where every hour has a price tag hanging from it like an ear. It starts small, the way sins do. A trip out to the property in a pickup that drinks fuel like a thirsty animal. A handheld GPS unit. A metal detector that beeps at nails and shotgun pellets and makes you believe you're close because it's making noise. Shovel work, sweat, blisters, the sort of labor that feels honest because it hurts. And then the earth doesn't give up its secrets politely. The ground turns to rock. The holes fill with water or collapse, or reveal nothing but more dirt and the same old stubborn silence. A man can handle disappointment when it's cheap, when it's his own body and his own time. But once he starts paying, disappointment becomes something else. It becomes an insult. That's when the machinery arrives. Not as a dramatic caravan, not with trumpets. It comes on flatbed trailers, chained down, paint scratched, hydraulic lines weeping, a backhoe, an excavator, sometimes a skid steer. The kind of equipment that makes the ground look smaller than it is because it gives a man leverage against geology. A machine like that isn't romance. It's arithmetic. A typical excavator rental in the 2010s, something mid-sized, nothing exotic, can run $3,000 to $5,000 a week. And that's before you count delivery, fuel, repairs, and the operator's wage if you're not the kind of fool who thinks he can learn by wrecking it. A backhoe might be cheaper, $1,500 to $2,500 a week, but cheaper still bleeds you if you keep it long enough. Diesel is never free. A machine can drink 10 to 15 gallons an hour if you work it hard, and a day's digging can turn into 80 gallons without you realizing it. The way a bad habit builds itself one just this once at a time. So the myth has to justify the cost. A man stands near the cut in the earth, and he starts talking in numbers, because numbers are what the money understands. He doesn't say, I believe. He says, if it's there, if it's really there, even a small cash could be worth, what, $200,000, $500,000, $1 million, depending on purity, depending on what form it's in, depending on whether it's coins or bars or artifacts some collector would pay stupid money for. He begins to speak like an investor, because investors are the only people who can keep a hole open for more than a weekend. And investors do not invest in dirt. They invest in stories. This is the moment the ranch changes its skin. It stops being a private obsession and becomes a pitch. Sometimes that pitch happens in a clean office under humming fluorescent lights with a banker who pretends to be bored while he measures you. Sometimes it happens in a diner off a 2-lane highway, coffee thick as motor oil, men talking low with their elbows on laminate tables. The location doesn't matter. What matters is the conversion, myth into opportunity. A man says, it's not just land, it's an asset. He might mention acreage, 160 acres, 320, a nice round slice that sounds controllable. He might talk about mineral potential because out here that's always the second story running under the first. He might even invoke history because history adds weight. He might not say Aztec out loud at first. He might say Spanish. He might say old. He might say documented. Then he brings out the photographs, not proof, not treasure, just images, holes, rocks, strange colors in the soil, maybe a blurry shot of something metallic half buried that could be anything if you squint hard enough. Evidence not of gold, but of effort. Effort is persuasive. Effort is expensive. Effort convinces men that quitting would be wasteful. And once money goes in, it has to keep going in. That's the trap. 1 week turns into 4. 4 turns into 12. A $4,000 rental becomes $16,000 before you've even lifted anything that you can hold in your hand. Add fuel, say $3.75 a gallon, and you're burning through $300 in a long day without blinking. Add labor, an operator at $35 an hour for 10 hours, and suddenly the whole is eating $350 of human life a day just to move its jaw. Add the small things that add up like termites, chains, straps, shovels, pumps, tarps, batteries, a new hydraulic hose because the old one burst like a vein. You watch the receipts pile up on the passenger seat, crumpled and dirty, a paper trail of faith. And the money changes the men, too. When it's just you and the ground, the land can refuse you and you can laugh, curse, try again. But when it's other people's money, or your family's money, or borrowed money with interest, you stop laughing. You start needing. You start hearing the legend differently. Every setback becomes an omen. Every obstacle becomes a test. And tests are easier to accept than the idea that you might be wrong. This is where the curse becomes useful. Not because it's true, but because it's functional. It gives the story teeth. It gives it protection against embarrassment. If the dig site floods, the curse did it. If the rock won't move, the curse did it. If the compass spins or the equipment fails, the curse did it. A curse is a way to stay heroic even when the hole stays empty. And with money comes something else. Attention. Contractors talk. Neighbors notice. Trucks hauling equipment don't glide by unseen in a place like this. You can't bring in a flatbed with a machine chained to it and not announce to the world that you're doing something worth chaining down. In rural country, news travels faster than the speed limit. By the time the first serious trench is cut, there are already people who heard something, people who know a guy, people who suddenly remember an old story their uncle told them in 1978 or 1993, years that sound harmless until they're used as anchors for new greed. And greed is never private for long. The men doing the digging begin to sense it. Little changes that don't show up on a receipt. Tire tracks where there shouldn't be tire tracks. A gate you swear you latched. The feeling at night that the darkness has eyes in it. The ranch is still quiet, still wide, still indifferent, but the human world around it is waking up to the scent of value. Money has found the myth, and now the myth has teeth enough to bite back. Because once you've told the world there might be something down there, once you've turned rumor into investment and investment into excavation, what happens when strangers decide they want a share of the hole you paid to open? They say the ranch was protected because it was special, because the ground held something ancient and the night itself knew it. They say the men who came prowling were drawn by the curse like moths to a porch light. It sounds cleaner that way, mystical, inevitable, almost noble. The truth is uglier and more practical. Protection begins the moment something becomes valuable, and value, real or imagined, brings the same predators every time, not spirits, people, men with bolt cutters, men with too much confidence and not enough daylight in their lives, men who hear the word gold and stop hearing the word no. A place like that doesn't announce itself. You find it by driving out past the last polite houses, past the pavement that gives up and turns to gravel, past the cell signal that stutters and then dies. The road narrows into two ruts, then into a suggestion. Sagebrush scrapes the sides of the truck. The tires throw dust that hangs in the air behind you like a tail, like evidence. If you're being followed, you'll never know until you stop and the world catches up. Then the gate. Not a romantic ranch gate, not the kind you see in calendars. A practical thing. Steel pipe, welded joints, a hinge that squeals when the wind hits it wrong, a chain looped through it, thick links that clink like loose change, and a padlock heavy enough to feel serious in your hand. A man might spend $600 on the gate materials, another $80 on the lock and chain, not because it will stop a determined intruder, nothing stops a determined intruder, but because it draws a line. It allows him to say later, in a calm voice to a deputy or a lawyer, "I did what I was supposed to do." The signs go up next. White background, black letters, the word private, like a warning and a dare, no trespassing. Sometimes the signs quote the law because people think law has weight out here. Sometimes they cite a statute, Utah Code 76-6206, as if the numbers themselves can keep strangers out. A sign is a small prayer nailed to a post, and then the cameras start appearing, because in the modern West you don't just own land, you manage a narrative. By 2018, you can buy a trail camera for $120 that will take photographs in the dark and stamp them with date and time like a judge. You can buy another one and another, and mount them in junipers and fence posts and the corners of outbuildings. You can run them on batteries and check the cards every few days, sitting in the cab of your truck scrolling through images. Rabbits, deer, a coyote trotting with its head down, the blurred streak of a bird too close to the lens, and then, sometimes, something else. A human figure at 2:14 a.m., a headlamp, a face washed out by infrared, a man's body angled in that particular way, half cautious, half entitled, as he tests a fence line with his hand. There is no sound in the photograph, no context, just the hard fact that someone was there when they had no business being there. That's how the paranoia begins, not like madness, like bookkeeping. You start counting tire tracks, boot prints, the number of times the gate was left exactly as you left it versus the number of times it wasn't. You start noticing how the dust settles on the road, how long it takes to look undisturbed. You start recognizing the difference between wind damage and human damage, the difference between a fence wire snapped by weather and one cut clean. A ranch hand, if you're lucky enough to have one, might notice it first. The quiet worker who doesn't talk much and watches everything, he comes up and says without drama that the south fence has been messed with. He points. There's a spot where the wire is loose, where a post has fresh scratches, where the ground shows a scuff mark that shouldn't be there. The evidence isn't cinematic, it's small. But small things out here are how trouble starts. You don't call it a threat at first. You call it activity. You call it movement. You tell yourself it's kids or hunters who got turned around or somebody looking for a lost dog. You tell yourself that because the alternative is admitting that the rumor has escaped your control, and control is what you paid for. So the next step is escalation disguised as responsibility. You add lights, motion-activated floods that cost $45 apiece and blind you when you forget where you mounted them. You reinforce the locks. You install a second gate deeper in, so even if someone breaches the first, they still have to commit to it. You put up cameras where people can see them and cameras where they can't. You start thinking in layers, like a fortress builder. Somebody suggests hiring security. It sounds dramatic until you put it into numbers. A man with experience, ex-military, ex-law enforcement, or just the kind of local who looks like he's been punched enough times to learn patience, might charge $25 an hour to sit in a truck and watch a road. 10 hours is $250. 4 nights a week is $1,000 before you buy us coffee. A month goes by and you realize you've spent $4,000 just to keep the night from happening on your land. And it still happens. Because the kind of person who trespasses for treasure doesn't come for an afternoon stroll. He comes when you can't see him. He comes when your body wants sleep. He comes when the sheriff is far away and the response time is measured in geography. Out here, distance is part of the criminal toolkit. A deputy might be 40 miles away when you call. He might have one other call on the radio. He might arrive 45 minutes later, dust trailing behind his cruiser, polite and tired and unable to do much unless he catches someone in the act. The law is a strong thing on paper. On land like this, it's slow. So the men on the ranch start doing what people always do when institutions feel distant. They take it personally. They ride fence lines with flashlights. They sit on tailgates and listen. They learn the normal sounds, wind in the brush, a far-off owl, the thin yip of coyotes, and they learn the abnormal ones, a faint engine note where no engine should be, a metallic clank, the soft crunch of boots on caliche. They start carrying tools that aren't tools. They keep firearms close not because they want violence, but because they don't want to be the one caught unprepared if violence finds them. And there's a particular kind of tension that grows when men start guarding a hole in the ground. Because the hole becomes a center of gravity. Everything orbits it: time, money, sleep, marriages, friendships. The dig site becomes sacred, and anything sacred attracts desecration. The more you guard it, the more you announce its importance. The more you announce its importance, the more you invite the world to test you. That's the trap of security. Every measure you take is both shield and advertisement. The guards, whether they're hired or family or loyal hands, learn the property in a different way than the dreamers do. Dreamers see possibilities. Guards see vulnerabilities. They see where a fence line dips into a wash and a man could slip through unseen. They see where a hill blocks the view of the main road. They see where a vehicle could park with its lights off. They begin to think like intruders because that's what the job demands. And the job changes them. It turns the night into a workplace. It turns the land into a perimeter. It turns suspicion into routine. The ranch, at this stage, is no longer just a search. It is a posture, a stance, a statement. Was this protection, ordinary, necessary, earned by the simple fact that the world contains thieves? Or was it the first moment the hunt stopped being about what might be under the ground and started being about who gets to stand above it and call himself the rightful king? They say a treasure hunter answers to no one. A lone man in a wide land. Boots. Shovel. A private war against the earth and whatever it's hiding. They say he bows only to grit. The reality is that once the story gets big enough, the treasure hunter starts answering to the same God everyone answers to out here. Money. And money has a court. It has paperwork. It has advisors. It has people who don't dig with shovels at all. People who dig with contracts and cameras and the slow pressure of expectation. The first time the ranch begins to feel like royalty isn't when gold glints in a pan. It's when strangers show up who don't smell like diesel and dirt. They smell like cologne and airline seats. They step out of a rental SUV with clean hands and sunburns that don't match the rest of their lives. They carry clipboards. They carry questions. They carry a kind of confidence that comes from knowing they can leave whenever they want. It's late summer. Pick a year like 2019 when streaming has taught the public to binge other people's danger and call it relaxation. The heat in the basin comes up off the ground in visible waves, making the horizon wobble. The air tastes like dust. Sweat dries fast and leaves salt on the skin. A fly keeps landing on the corner of a man's eye, and he keeps ignoring it because he's trying to look serious. The ranch owner, patriarch, captain, the man who believes he is steering this ship, stands near the gate as if the gate is a throne. He doesn't wear a crown. He wears a belt and a hat and a look that says, "This is mine." But his posture is a performance. You can feel it because he knows he's being evaluated. A producer asks about the curse not because the producer believes in curses, but because curses sell. The producer says the word like it's a flavor. The owner talks about strange lights and trespassers and bad luck and things that don't make sense. He mentions the hole. He mentions the chain that went taut. He tells it clean, like a story he's practiced on the drive over. And then the producer asks what it will cost to keep digging. That's where the romance ends. That's where the ledger opens. Even the first small production day is a little army. 2 camera operators, a sound person, a field producer, a driver, maybe a safety medic. Because insurance companies have no sense of humor about remote locations and heavy equipment. If you're paying them like professionals, you're looking at numbers that don't care how sacred your story feels. $400 for a day rate PA, $750 for sound. Holla $200 for a camera operator with decent gear. And that's before the production company piles on its own overhead like gravel in the back of a truck. And then there's the insurance. Out here, a backhoe isn't just a tool, it's a liability with teeth. A production can't just show up and start filming men near an excavation without somebody in an office demanding proof that if a man breaks a leg or a trench collapses, the cameras won't be the last thing the company ever touches. So someone produces a certificate, someone pays a premium. The price changes with the risk, but the process is always the same. The dream has to be translated into a form a lawyer can understand. So the ranch owner sits at a folding table in the shade of a truck's open tailgate and begins signing papers that smell like fresh print. Releases, waivers, appearance agreements, a stack thick enough to make his hand cramp. The pen is cheap, blue plastic, promotional, but the signature is expensive because it turns the ranch into a product. This is what royalty looks like in modern America. A man in the dirt being handed a contract that makes him feel chosen. He might get an advance. Not a king's ransom, not at first. Something like $10,000 to cover production support. Enough to make a dent in fuel and equipment, but not enough to set him free. Just enough to bind him. Because money that small is a hook. It doesn't solve your problems. It gives you permission to keep having them. And the owner agrees because the cameras offer something the whole never promised. An audience. Proof that the struggle matters. Proof that it's not just him out there listening to the ground refuse him. But the cameras don't film solitude. They film hierarchy. On set, though nobody calls it a set out loud, there's always someone holding a walkie-talkie who speaks with the authority of scheduling. People gather around the patriarch because the story needs a center. The team becomes characters. The loyal son, the skeptical expert, the tough hand, the nervous newcomer. These roles are not always fake. They're just exaggerated, sharpened, made legible for strangers. And beneath them all, like the root system under a tree, is the invisible workforce that actually makes the day happen. A location manager who drove out a week earlier and found where the trucks could park. A grip who's been carrying cases since dawn. A production assistant standing in the sun, counting down battery life. A medic watching quietly. Because when men start digging around machines and adrenaline, bodies eventually pay. People who will never be described as brave, though they're the ones closest to the edges. People who are not chasing gold at all. Just a paycheck. $250 a day, maybe $350, because their rent doesn't accept folklore. And the patriarch, if he's honest, feels the shift. He used to be the only man who could call the dig-off. Now there's a schedule, a call time, a shot list. If a storm rolls in, it's not just inconvenience, it's budget. If the equipment breaks, it's not just bad luck, it's downtime, and downtime has a cost measured in hours and invoices. If the men are tired, the cameras still want a scene, because scenes are what turn into episodes, and episodes are what turn into renewed contracts. This is where the great man myth starts to rot around the edges. Because the patriarch is capable, he's stubborn, he's the kind of man who can stare at a problem for months and not blink. That is a rare thing, but capability is not purity. His authority is built on other people's labor. Hands who carry and dig and weld and haul, wives and children who live with the absence and the stress, workers who show up when the sun isn't up and go home when it is. An empire in the dirt is still an empire, and empires are always paid for by those standing in the shadows. The ranch becomes a court. People orbit the center. The owner's decisions become strategy. His instincts become vision. His stubbornness becomes leadership. And the cameras love it because America loves a man who looks like he's winning against something larger than himself. But the ground doesn't care about story arcs, and money never stays loyal. At first, the checks feel like proof that the hunt mattered even if the hole stayed empty. Then the checks start to feel like chains. The budget becomes its own kind of curse, the requirement that something happen, that the land deliver, that the story keep paying its own way. The patriarch begins to realize he's not just defending a dig site anymore. He's defending a brand, a reputation, a fragile arrangement held together by viewership and contracts and the public's appetite for mystery. Was this still a treasure hunt? Men against earth? Sweat against stone? Or had it become something colder? A business that would live or die not by what they found underground, but by what the market decided it was worth watching. They say the curse wakes up when you get close, that the land waits until the shovel bites deep, and then it starts taking payment in parts. Equipment, sleep, marriages, sometimes men. It's a comforting explanation. It lets you blame the dark instead of the math. But the harsh truth is that most curses in America come stapled to an invoice. There's a morning, sharp, pale, windless, when the basin looks almost gentle. The sage holds a faint silver sheen where the sun hits it. The trucks are parked in a crooked line like tired animals. A man stands with a coffee that's gone cold in his hand, staring at a letter he doesn't want to open because he already knows what it says. It's the insurance renewal. The paper is crisp, clean, indifferent. The kind of paper that comes from an office far away where people wear soft shoes and talk about risk the way preachers talk about sin. It lists the ranch by its legal name, its address, a policy number, and then it lists the ranch's new relationship with reality. A premium that has climbed, a deductible that has fattened, exclusions that have multiplied like weeds. $18,400 for the year, the number sitting there like a rock on the page. A $10,000 deductible for bodily injury, another $10,000 for property damage. And in the fine print, the reminder that excavation is its own category of danger. The reminder that if a trench collapses and a man is buried, if his ribs snap, if his lungs fill, there will be questions asked with legal mouths. There will be depositions. There will be experts. There will be a family somewhere holding a photograph and demanding a reason. And the paper doesn't care how romantic the story is. The paper cares about standards. It cares about whether you complied with OSHA excavation rules. The ones written in black and white in 29 CFR 1926, Subpart P, rules that tell you how steep a trench wall must be sloped, when it must be shored, how a ladder must be set within 25 feet of workers in a trench. Rules that don't bend because a man feels called by treasure. Rules that assume the earth is always ready to kill you, because it is. So the ranch owner reads the letter twice, slow, as if the words might change if he studies them hard enough. His thumb smudges the ink. He looks up at the land, and for a moment it's almost funny. The sagebrush doesn't know what a deductible is. The ground doesn't know what a federal code is. The land just sits there, waiting, while men argue about who pays when it bites back. And then his phone rings. It's the producer, a bright voice from a different world, talking about the season, about deliverables, about momentum. The ranch owner listens with his jaw tight. In the distance, an excavator stands with its arm folded, hydraulic cylinders catching the morning light like old scars. Viewership, the producer says, as if viewership is weather. as if it comes and goes and there's nothing you can do but dress for it. The producer talks about the algorithm, about engagement, about how the world has gotten noisier. The ranch owner hears underneath it the real message: make it bigger or watch it die. A man can survive a drought. He can survive a broken machine. But a man who has built his finances on attention cannot survive silence. And silence has a price now. Back in March 2020, when the world began shutting doors and wiping down doorknobs and talking about sickness like it was a war, production schedules across the country buckled. Crew travel got complicated. Permits became harder. People argued about masks out in places where the wind was strong enough to carry a cough to Nevada. The ranch still existed, still remote, still stubborn. But the system that turned the ranch into money started showing cracks. Then the economy did what it always does. It punished the people who can least afford surprise. By August 2020, gold prices surged into history, past $2,000 an ounce. And you could feel how that number changed men's faces. It made the legend flare bright again. It made every rumor feel more plausible, more urgent. When gold rises like that, it doesn't just raise hope. It raises competition. It tells every desperate person with a truck and a pair of cutters that there's money hiding somewhere, and they just have to get there first. But while gold rose, everything else rose too. The quiet costs that don't get romantic music behind them. Diesel climbed in waves, and by June 2022, you could find yourself paying $5.50 a gallon in plenty of places, watching the pump spin like a slot machine you can't win. Equipment rental rates climbed. A mid-sized excavator that might have been $3,500 a week a few years earlier could now sit at $4,800 or more, depending on availability, delivery, and whether a dozen other projects were also clawing at the same limited inventory. And the ranch owner begins to feel the squeeze from both sides, the market demanding spectacle, the land demanding payment, the costs demanding obedience. He meets with a lawyer in a small office with framed certificates on the wall. The lawyer's hands are clean in the way clean hands can be unsettling. The lawyer talks about liability the way a mortician talks about gravity. Inevitable, impersonal, always waiting. He mentions lawsuits, wrongful death, negligence. He says words like duty of care and foreseeability. And he asks questions that don't sound like questions so much as warnings. Do you have a safety plan? Do you document training? Do you restrict access to the dig site? Do you keep releases? Do you have signage? Do you understand what happens if someone gets hurt on camera and claims you pressured them? The ranch owner answers as best he can, but the truth is he built this thing on instinct and grit and the belief that the land would eventually pay him back. Nobody wants to build a dream on clipboards. Nobody wants to confess that a federal regulation might matter more than a curse. Later, alone in his truck, he opens a notebook that is turned into a kind of prayer book. Lines of costs, scratched in pen, each one a small surrender. Fuel, chains, camera repairs, a generator, batteries, labor. The insurance premium circled hard enough to tear the paper, and as the numbers stack up, the romance starts to thin. Because there comes a point where the question is no longer, is there treasure? The question becomes, can we afford to keep believing? It's an ugly question because it puts a price tag on faith. It turns the dream into a balance sheet. It turns a man's identity into a line item. And when the world turns like this, when markets rise and fall, when insurance tightens, when costs inflate, When the audience gets restless, the ranch owner starts doing what men always do when the outside pressure becomes unbearable. He turns inward. He looks to the people closest to him, the ones who can't easily walk away, the ones whose loyalty was built long before there were cameras and premiums and algorithms. He starts asking for more hours, more patience, more sacrifice. He starts spending not just money, but goodwill. And that's when the most dangerous ground begins to shift, not under the trench, but under the family itself. So tell me, when the economy puts its hand around a man's throat, does he tighten his grip on the people who love him? Or does he finally see how easily love can be spent like cash? They say blood is thicker than water. They say family is the one thing the West can't take from you. A man can lose his herd, lose his land, lose his name in town, and still come home to his own people and be forgiven because he belongs to them. It's a comforting myth. It keeps the cold out for a while. The truth is that money is thicker than blood when it's late, when it's owed, when it's sitting on the kitchen table in the form of receipts and renewal notices and a red number circled so hard the paper is almost torn. There's a night in November 2021, not special on the calendar, just a night like any other, when the wind comes down off the high country and rattles the windows as if the house is trying to get away. Inside, the air is warm and smells like fried grease and stale coffee. The overhead light over the table makes a small, harsh circle, and everything outside that circle falls off into shadow. On the table, a ledger notebook with bent corners, a calculator with worn buttons, a stack of mail that has been opened and not put away because nobody wants to pretend these are normal letters. The generator invoice, the fuel receipts, the equipment rental agreement with the numbers printed clean as if cleanliness makes them easier to swallow. $400 to $800 for the week on the excavator, plus delivery, plus fuel. The insurance renewal with its quiet threat, $80 to $400 for the year, and a $10,000 deductible that might as well be a small coffin. A man, call him the patriarch if you want, because that's what the story likes, sits at the head of the table, the way men sit at the head of tables when they're afraid of losing it. He doesn't look dramatic. He looks tired. His hands are cracked at the knuckles. There's dirt in the creases that never fully washes out. Not because he's dirty, but because he's been living in the ground mentally for too long. Across from him sits someone younger, a son, a nephew, a partner you can't fire without turning Thanksgiving into a war. The younger man has his own calluses, but he also has the look of someone who has been reading contracts, who has begun to understand how quickly life can become numbers. He keeps glancing at the stack of bills the way you glance at a snake you don't want to admit is in the room. In the corner of the table, half in shadow, sits the invisible workforce of the family itself. A woman with her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, the kind of posture you get when you've been holding a household together for years and you're tired of being called support. Her hands are near a mug that's gone cold. She watches the men talk and says very little, not because she has nothing to say, but because she knows how easily a sentence can become a match. The patriarch taps the calculator with one finger. The buttons click like small bones. He says, "We're close." He always says that. Close is the most expensive word in this business. Close can justify a month. Close can justify another $5.50 a gallon diesel run like it's nothing. Another long day where the machine drinks 80 gallons and nobody flinches because flinching doesn't change the bill. Close can justify missing birthdays, skipping Sundays, waking up at 2 a.m. because you thought you heard a truck on the road. The younger man doesn't argue at first. He flips through receipts, slow, as if the order might reveal meaning. He stops on a line item. Maybe it's a chain, $312. Maybe it's replacement camera batteries, $96. Maybe it's a hydraulic hose, $487. And he lets it sit there between them like evidence. "We've spent," he begins, and he stops because saying the total out loud feels like lighting a fuse. The patriarch looks at him with a stare that has built empires and burned bridges. He says, "Spent isn't lost if it pays out." That's the faith, not church faith, American faith. The faith that effort must eventually be rewarded because otherwise the world is just chaos and you're just a fool with a shovel. The woman finally speaks. Her voice is calm, which is its own kind of anger. "What about the mortgage?" she asks. There it is. The word that drags the whole dream down into the kitchen. Mortgage, not gold, not curse, not destiny. Just the plain fact of a bank expecting money on a schedule. The patriarch shifts in his chair. He looks away toward the window where the wind keeps pressing its face to the glass. He says something about next month, about a check, about how once the next thing is filmed, it will cover the gap. He says it with the confidence of someone who has survived by improvisation. But improvisation is a young man's trick. It gets harder when the stakes include other people's stability. The younger man's jaw tightens. He doesn't want to disrespect the older man. He also doesn't want to drown. "And if it doesn't?" he asks. Silence. The refrigerator hums. Somewhere a pipe ticks as it cools. The patriarch leans forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped, as if he's about to pray. He says, "It will." And in that moment, you can see how family becomes a machine. Loyalty turns into leverage. The older man's certainty becomes a weight everyone else has to carry. The younger man's skepticism becomes betrayal. The woman's concern becomes nagging. Everybody gets cast in a role that makes the story cleaner and the home uglier. This is where the curse becomes more than marketing. It becomes a shield inside the family. Because if the ranch is cursed, then every setback is not a consequence of choices. It's an outside force. It's a villain you can blame without blaming each other. It keeps the patriarch from being wrong. It keeps the younger man from being right. It keeps the woman from having to say the word she doesn't want to say. Stop. Faith enters too. The real kind. The kind that isn't for television. Some families pray before meals. Some pray before they go out at night to check fences because they've been seeing unfamiliar tracks again. Somebody quotes scripture under their breath. Somebody asks God to keep the men safe. Somebody asks God to keep the land honest. And then they go do the dangerous thing anyway because prayer isn't an alternative to risk. Prayer is just the ritual you perform when you're about to gamble with what you love. The patriarch sleeps poorly. The younger man sleeps with his phone on the nightstand, volume up, because if something happens out there, it's not a business call. It's family. The woman sleeps the lightest because someone has to hear the small sounds that mean the household is about to crack. And the cracks show in daylight too. A short temper in the yard. A snapped sentence. A look that lasts 1 second too long. The way people stop talking about the ranch unless they have to. The way children learn not to ask questions because questions bring tension into the room. The myth says empires are built by great men. The truth is, empires are built on the backs of people who never get called great. The people who keep the lights on. The people who pack lunches. The people who swallow fear so the dream can keep marching. Out in the basin, the patriarch can pretend he's battling the earth. At the table, he's battling time. He's battling the patience of the people who are quietly paying for his obsession with their peace. And when a family reaches this point, when loyalty becomes obligation and obligation becomes resentment, the outside world starts to feel it. It leaks, it shows, it becomes an opening. So tell me, when the fault lines finally shift and the home goes quiet in that dangerous way, does the family close ranks around the dream? Or does the fracture invite the next kind of crisis, the kind that doesn't stay inside the house? They say the crisis came in a single night, one clean cinematic moment, headlights in the sage, a shouted warning, a curse finally showing its teeth. They say you can draw a bright line between before and after, the way you can draw a line between a man and the shadow he's about to become. The truth is that crisis arrives the way winter does out here, not with a trumpet, but with a slow tightening. A week of little signs, a month of bad sleep, a year of the land teaching you that value, real or imagined, turns every quiet place into contested ground. It is December 14th, 2022, and the day has been the color of old tin. The basin kept its cold even under sunlight. By late afternoon, the temperature has slipped down into the low 20s, and the wind has a thin edge to it, like a knife that isn't trying very hard. The men on the ranch go through their routines with the heavy calm of people who no longer trust routine to protect them. The gate is checked twice. The chain is looped through the steel, the way you loop a rosary through your fingers, habit masquerading as faith. The padlock, a thick-bodied thing that cost $79.99 at a hardware store, clicks shut. The signs are there in black letters, "No trespassing," "Private property," some statute number quoted like scripture, Utah Code 766206, because the law looks more convincing when it has digits. Cameras blink their small red eyes from fence posts and trees. Cheap plastic sentries, bought for $129 apiece, mounted at chest height, angled toward the road, their lenses already fogging slightly in the cold. The ranch is quiet enough that you can hear a boot scuff on gravel from 30 feet away, quiet enough that you begin to imagine sound where there is none. Inside the house, if there is a house or a trailer or whatever shelter the ranch offers, the mood is not fear exactly. It's vigilance. Fear is too blunt. Vigilance is fear that learned to dress itself. A man, call him the patriarch because that is the role the story insists on, checks his phone even though there is no signal worth trusting. He checks it anyway. He listens to the wind. He listens for the particular sound of tires on gravel. That sound is the new heartbeat of the place. At 2:17 a.m., the cameras do what they always do. They keep recording silence. Rabbits. A coyote passing through like it owns the night. A tumbleweed hitting a fence and bouncing off with a dry rattle. Then the lights. Not the work lights. Not the steady glow of a generator. A moving light low to the ground, sweeping. Headlights that cut through the sage and throw long shadows that look like men standing where no men are. The beams pause, dim, brighten, as if the driver is deciding something. No one can say later, with honest certainty, whether this is a wrong turn or a test. People like to assign motives after the fact, because motives make the chaos feel navigable. But in that moment, the only truth is the one the body understands. Somebody is here, and it's the wrong hour for innocence. A door opens somewhere. The cold pours in. A man steps out with a flashlight in one hand, another follows. Their breath rises in pale bursts and vanishes. They don't rush. Rushing gets people hurt. They walk the way men walk when they know they might have to explain this night in a courtroom later. The truck out by the road kills its lights. Darkness swallows it. The engine keeps running. Just a low murmur, barely audible, but enough to carry through the cold air like confession. A fence line creaks. Metal complains. A chain snaps taut with a small, sharp sound, too crisp to be wind. Something is being pulled. A gate, maybe, or a section of wire, or the padlock itself being tested, that private little moment where a stranger's hand decides whether your boundaries are real. The patriarch feels his heart do something it shouldn't have to do at his age, not because he's a coward, because he's human, and humans are not built for this kind of constant alertness. The body spends its currency whether you want it to or not. Someone calls out, not a greeting, not a threat, a command, the kind of word that tries to turn private land into controlled space. The answer is not a voice, it is movement. Boots in brush, a quick shuffle, the hard slap of a hand against metal, the soft grind of tires turning without headlights, trying to retreat without being seen. It is messy and fast and nothing like the clean drama people expect when they imagine trespassers. And then the sound that changes everything, the crack of a gunshot. Out here, a shot doesn't echo the way it does in movies. It snaps and disappears into the open. The noise is both huge and instantly absorbed, like the land is used to it. Whether it's a warning shot, whether it's fired into dirt, whether it's fired in panic, those details are argued later by men who weren't there and by men who were there but want the story to favor them. In the moment, all it does is announce a new truth. This is no longer a rumor hunt. This is a collision. The truck lurches, gravel spits, the beams flash on for a second, bright, blinding, then streak away down the track, leaving a tail of dust and exhaust that hangs in the cold air like a ghost that doesn't need superstition to exist. Somebody calls 911. They give the address the way people give prayers, quick, imperfect, hopeful. The dispatcher asks questions in a calm voice that sounds like another universe. Are you safe? Are there injuries? Did you see a weapon? How many people? What direction did they go? The answer to the last one is always the same in places like this: into the dark. A deputy eventually arrives because the law does arrive, it just arrives on geography's schedule. 30 miles maybe. 40. A response time measured in minutes that feel like hours when you're standing under starlight with your nerves exposed. The cruiser's headlights wash over the gate. The deputy steps out, shoulders hunched against the cold, breath visible, flashlight beam moving over the ground like he's reading Braille. He takes statements. He looks at the fence. He finds fresh tracks. Maybe he finds tire marks. Maybe. Out here, evidence is fragile. Wind erases. Dust covers. The land is a faithful accomplice to whoever wants to disappear. He writes something down, a report number, ink on a form. Another small piece of paperwork joining the stack that now defines the ranch as much as any legend. When the deputy leaves, the ranch doesn't go back to sleep. It can't. The men stand there in the cold, listening to the quiet that returns, and they realize what has happened. The story has crossed a threshold. There is now the possibility, no longer theoretical, that someone will die over something that may not even exist. The patriarch goes back inside and sits at the kitchen table where the Bills live. His hands shake just enough to make him angry. He has wanted treasure. He has wanted proof. He has wanted vindication. But he did not want this sharp, ugly intimacy with violence, this sense that the land is no longer merely difficult, but contested. And yet, part of him, some stubborn, dangerous part, feels something else too. A grim confirmation. If people are willing to come in the night, willing to risk a confrontation, then maybe the rumor really is worth something. Maybe the pressure is evidence. Maybe the fear is proof. That is how crisis feeds itself, because the more the ranch hardens, the more it attracts the kind of people who like hard things. The more the story spreads, the more strangers arrive who believe they have a claim, and the more the patriarch tries to hold it all together, land, family, brand, safety, the more his body and mind begin to show the cost. So tell me, when the night finally forces a man to understand what his dream can summon, does he tighten his grip and become harder? Or does the weight of it begin to break the one person everyone has been pretending is unbreakable? They say the curse kills the greedy. That it waits until a man is deep enough in the earth, deep enough in debt, deep enough in the story, and then it reaches up and takes him the way a river takes a drunk. It's a clean superstition. It makes death look like justice. It makes the universe look organized. The truth is quieter. The truth is that time is the only curse that never misses. Time and stress and the steady drain of living as if the next hole will finally justify the last one. It is February 6, 2023, and the morning has that brittle winter light that makes everything feel exposed. The kind of light that turns breath into smoke and turns a man's hand stiff before he's even done lacing his boots. The truck heater works only when it wants to. The basin sits out there wide and patient, but today he doesn't drive toward it. He drives toward town. The building is plain, stucco, glass doors, a sign with letters bleached by sun. Inside, it smells like antiseptic and old magazines. The waiting room is too warm. A television murmurs with captions nobody watches. There's a stack of pamphlets about heart health and diabetes and stress management, the modern gospel of consequences. He fills out a form with a pen tethered to a clipboard by a chain. The chain rattles faintly. A small indignity. Date of birth. Medications, allergies, next of kin. A man who has wrestled machines and land now has to admit, in writing, that his body is not a myth. When they call him back, it isn't dramatic. It's a young nurse with tired eyes and practiced kindness. She takes his blood pressure, and the cuff squeezes his arm hard enough to hurt, as if it's testing him. 186/108. She looks at the number, then at his face. She takes it again after a minute, the way you recheck a measurement when you don't like what it tells you. 182/100x. She doesn't say curse. She doesn't say gold. She says words like hypertension and risk. She asks about sleep. He laughs once, short and humorless. Sleep is for people who aren't guarding a story. In the exam room, the paper on the table crackles when he sits. The doctor comes in with a tablet in his hand, scrolling through the man's life reduced to data points. The doctor asks about chest pain, about headaches, about dizziness. He asks about stress, and the patriarch almost answers with a joke. because men like him treat jokes like armor. But armor doesn't lower blood pressure. The doctor tells him what he already knows in his bones, that living in a constant state of alert, listening for trucks at 2 a.m., paying bills with dread in your throat, holding a family together with one hand while digging with the other, doesn't just wear a man down. It poisons him slowly. It makes his heart work like a pump pushed beyond its rating. The doctor says, you need to slow down, as if the ranch is a treadmill he can step off. He drives home with a prescription in the glove box and a heavy quiet in his chest that isn't pain, exactly. It's the feeling of being told that the thing you built your identity on might be killing you, and that the killing is ordinary enough to be treated with a pill. Back at the house, the kitchen table is still a battlefield. Receipts, insurance notices, a rental agreement tucked into a folder like a confession, $4,800 for the excavator week, plus fuel, plus delivery. That number doesn't just represent money. It represents hours of machinery biting into rock and finding stubbornness instead of treasure. There's a legal pad with a list in his own handwriting. Camera replacements, generator maintenance, lock upgrades, little expenses that add up like sand in a machine. A trail camera that cost $129 is nothing until you buy 8 of them and replace the batteries twice a month and start thinking of the night as a thing you have to purchase protection from. His wife, if she's still at the table, if she hasn't walked out yet, watches him move like he's older than yesterday. His son watches too, not with pity, but with calculation. Sons do that when they know the weight is about to be handed down. And that is how succession really begins. Not with a speech, not with a blessing, with a man's body failing to cooperate with his pride. A week later, an attorney comes out, not because anyone wants lawyers around a dream, but because every dream eventually needs a cage built for it. The attorney's car is clean. The attorney's shoes don't have dust on them. He steps inside with a briefcase and a soft voice, and the air changes the way it changes when you bring paperwork into a room full of feelings. They talk about an LLC, about liability, about what happens if someone gets hurt on the property again, about what happens if the patriarch dies, and the land, 160 acres or 320, however much it is, however it's been sliced and described, gets tied up in probate like an animal in wire. They talk about a trust. They talk about beneficiaries. They talk about who can make decisions when the man who has been making all the decisions is suddenly just another patient in a hospital bed. The attorney lays documents on the table. The paper is thick. The print is dark. It's a strange thing, watching a man who thinks of himself as unstoppable sign his name beneath paragraphs that anticipate his absence. The notary stamp comes down with a dull thunk. A small sound, but it lands heavy. The notary charges $10. $10 to formalize mortality. Outside the ranch, hands keep working because work doesn't pause for paperwork. A fence line needs mending. A generator needs fuel. Somebody has to check the cameras. Somebody has to drive the perimeter. The invisible workforce does what it has always done. They keep the thing alive while the man at the center of it quietly begins to fade. And the patriarch feels that fading like a theft. He still goes out to the dig site on good days. He stands at the edge of the cut in the earth and stares down into it, jaw clenched, as if he can intimidate geology. The wind moves through the sage. The machines sit idle, rust creeping in the corners where paint has chipped. The chain hangs slack. The hole looks the same as it did when it first promised him something, and that sameness is its own cruelty. He wants to believe he can outlast it. He wants to believe the land will eventually pay him back, not just in money, but in vindication. He wants to believe that if he stops, the story will die, and his life will shrink down to what it always was: bills, chores, mortality, silence. But there's a moment, small, almost invisible, when he realizes the story will go on without him. Not because it's true, because it's useful, because it's already feeding mouths besides his, because cameras and rumors and trespassers don't need his permission anymore. He sits again at the kitchen table one night, medicine bottle beside his coffee. The label shows dosage in clean black type, twice a day like an order. His son talks about the next steps, the next season, the next plan, the next way to keep the ranch afloat. The patriarch listens. He nods once, slow, and you can see it, this death of the old story happening while the man is still breathing. The story that said one stubborn man could wrestle wealth from the earth by sheer force is thinning, losing blood. In its place, something colder begins to rise. The idea that the ranch might survive not by finding treasure, but by selling the pursuit of it. So, when the great man starts to slip from the center, when the body can no longer pay the price the ego demanded, what happens to the dream next? Does it die with him, or does it reinvent itself, trading shovels for cameras and turning the curse into a brand? They say they never stopped hunting gold, that even as the old man's hands began to tremble and the nights began to taste like fear, the work stayed pure, steel against stone, sweat against the stubborn earth. They say the cameras were just witnesses, incidental, like flies on a carcass. The story they like to tell is that the treasure remained the point. The colder truth is that the point moved, quietly, efficiently, like money always does when it realizes it can be paid without ever being found. It is April 18th, 2023, and the wind is up early, dragging itself through the sage as if the land is trying to erase footprints before they can become evidence. The ranch is awake in a different way now, not with the honest clatter of work, but with preparation. Cases set on the ground, lenses capped and uncapped, batteries lined up like ammunition. A man in a black jacket with a headset keeps looking at his watch because time is no longer sunup to sundown. It's scheduled in blocks, parceled into what can be sold. The patriarch doesn't come out first. The younger men do. They move with the half-stiffness of people who have learned to perform their own lives. One of them checks the gate and the chain, not because the chain matters, but because the chain reads as protection. Another walks the perimeter with a radio that crackles with voices you can't see. A drone case sits open like a coffin waiting for its occupant. Somewhere off to the side there's a folding table with paperwork on it, release forms, safety checklists, a call sheet stapled in the corner. The call sheet has names on it that don't belong to the ranch. Crew, producer, medic, field coordinator. It has times printed in clean black ink. 0630 crew call, or 715 talent, or 8.0, or how first setup. The land doesn't care, but the land is no longer the boss. When the patriarch finally steps out, the air catches in his lungs the way it does when your body is no longer your own instrument. He stands for a second, looking at the vehicles he doesn't recognize. White vans, a box truck, a rented SUV, and you can see it on his face. The faint shock of realizing that his private obsession has grown into an operation that can run without him. That's what reinvention looks like in real time, not fireworks. A man noticing he's become a character in something larger. The producer approaches with a friendly smile that has nothing to do with friendship. The producer's job is to keep the story alive. Alive means profitable. Profitable means repeatable. They talk near the tailgate of a truck, voices low as if secrecy still matters. The producer holds a folder and speaks in terms that sound harmless until you hear the machinery inside them. Season, arc, deliverables, renewal. The patriarch nods, slow, pretending this language is foreign when he's already been learning it for years. The folder opens. Papers slide out in the wind and are pinned down by hand. On one page, a number sits clean as a bullet, $25,000, an episode fee. The kind of money that makes a man feel paid and also makes him feel owned. Another line? 8 episodes, with an option for 8 more if performance metrics justify it. There's a clause about exclusive access, another about confidentiality, another about conduct, because the camera is not interested in the truth if the truth threatens the product. The patriarch's thumb rubs the edge of the paper until it frays. He's thinking about the insurance premium, $8,400, and the fuel bills and the mortgage, and the way his son's face looks when the numbers don't add up. He is thinking about keeping the ranch afloat. A man tells himself he's choosing opportunity, but most of the time he's choosing whichever option hurts less right now. The producer says something like, "We want to lean into the curse." Lean, like you lean into a turn, like you lean into a lie you've decided is useful. Because the curse is the brand now, not the gold. A crew member asks the patriarch to repeat a line he said earlier because the microphone didn't catch it clean. He repeats it, same words, flatter this time. The crew member nods anyway. A camera operator asks him to walk again from the truck to the dig site. Slower, more deliberate, because the movement needs to read as purpose. The patriarch does it because that's what the money demands. Every reenactment is a small theft of reality. Every take is the world asking you to become simpler. They stage the dig without calling it staging. They lay out tools in a tidy way no working man ever lays out tools. They position the men so the light falls right on their faces. They wait for a gust of wind because wind looks dramatic. They talk about beats, moments when someone should say something ominous, moments when someone should look over his shoulder. And the ranch hands, real workers, not performers, watch all of this with a kind of mute contempt. They know what it costs to keep a generator running at night. They know what it costs to fix a fence after somebody cuts it. They know how many hours it takes to pull a machine out of mud when a storm turns the road into soup. Their labor is not cinematic. Their labor is just labor. And yet their labor is what makes the show possible. The reinvention spreads outward. A website goes up, merchandise gets discussed, hats, shirts, decals, cheap cloth turned into identity. Somebody mentions margins. You sell a $20 shirt that costs $9 to print. You keep the difference, and the difference starts to look like salvation when the land won't cough up treasure. Somebody talks about sponsorships, a branded shovel, a branded flashlight, a partner who pays to be seen near the myth. The curse becomes a logo. The logo becomes a revenue stream. The hole in the ground becomes intellectual property. Even The language changes. The patriarch used to say, "We're digging." Now he says, "We're documenting. We're investigating. We're uncovering." Words that promise progress even when the earth stays silent. Words that keep the audience hooked because the audience is not paying for answers. The audience is paying for tension. By late afternoon, the crew is tired in a way workers recognize. The difference is that this exhaustion doesn't smell like honest dirt. It smells like performance, like repeating the same walk, the same line, the same stare into the hole until it looks right. The sun drops and the temperature falls fast, and the producer says they need night coverage because night is where the myth lives. So the lights come out, the same harsh halogens, the same black beyond the circle of illumination. Someone asks for one more take of a man listening into the dark like the dark might speak back. And the ranch owner, who once believed the land held treasure, begins to understand a new kind of treasure has already been found. Not in the dirt, in the attention, in the ability to turn dread into episodes, episodes into checks, checks into survival. Was this reinvention a clever kind of rescue, turning a failing hunt into a paying story? Or was it the moment the ranch stopped searching for gold altogether and started selling access to the dream, piece by piece, signature by signature, until the land itself became just another asset to be leased and traded? They say selling out is the moment the curse wins, the moment the dream gets traded for cameras and contracts and a clean, air-conditioned lie. They say the real hunters keep digging until their nails break and their backs give out, because anything else is surrender. But the truth is that surrender is rarely dramatic. It doesn't arrive on horseback. It arrives in an email subject line. It arrives in a conference call. It arrives as a number written in bold, surrounded by smaller numbers that tell you what it will cost to stay alive. It is June 3rd, 2023, and the ranch is quiet in the way a place gets quiet when it's waiting for men to decide what it is. The wind slides through the sage. A gate creaks once and settles. The hole is still there, squared off, its edges slumping just enough to remind you that the earth is always reclaiming what you borrow from it. Inside, the patriarch sits at the kitchen table with a folder open in front of him. The folder is thick. The paper is heavier than regular paper, the kind that makes you feel as if the words have weight. The room smells like coffee that's been warmed twice, and a faint chemical cleaner that can't quite chase away the scent of diesel carried in on boots. His hand rests on a page where the fee is printed clean. $25,000 per episode. 8 episodes guaranteed. An option for 8 more if the season performs. That word performs has nothing to do with effort and everything to do with appetite. The audience's appetite, the market's appetite, the algorithm's appetite. The patriarch reads the clauses with his finger like a man reading scripture in a language he doesn't speak fluently. Exclusive access, confidentiality, right to depict, release of liability. There's a paragraph about safety that references rules the land doesn't care about, but the courts do. 29 CFR 1926. Subpart P, excavation standards, the kind of thing you learn only after a scare or a lawsuit. He flips to another page. Merchandise, licensing, use of name and likeness. The ranch isn't just land anymore. It's a mark, a symbol. A little factory that turns mystery into cash. His son sits across from him, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the numbers like they might start moving if he looks long enough. The son has the weary patience of someone who has watched a dream become a bill. The wife, if she's still here, if the home hasn't already been thinned out by tension, moves around the room without speaking much. She makes the kind of small noises that say a household is still functioning, a drawer opening, a mug set down, a chair scraped back into place. The producer's voice comes through the phone on speaker, bright and calm and distant. It's the voice of a world where danger is content and content is inventory. We need to clarify ownership of the story, the producer says. Ownership. The word hits the room like a stone because the patriarch thought he already owned it. He owns the gate, the fences, the cameras, the land, 160 acres, 320, whatever portion has been carved out and paid for. He's paid for it in checks and labor and fear. But this is a different kind of ownership, not dirt, but narrative, not surface rights, but attention rights. The producer mentions deliverables again, mentions brand protection, mentions a consistent threat profile. The producer wants trespassers, but not too many. Wants danger, but not real tragedy. Wants the curse, but controllable. Wants the land to behave like a stage. The patriarch looks down at the insurance renewal folded under the contract, the number circled hard. $18,400. He thinks about the excavator rental agreement, $4,800 a week. He thinks about diesel at $5.50 a gallon when the prices spike. The pump clicking like a metronome counting down his life. He thinks about the last night someone came to the gate and a gun cracked the dark and the deputy arrived too late to see anything but dust. He knows, in a way men hate knowing, that the land may never pay him back. But the story already is, so he does what American men have done for a long time when the ground stops yielding. He pivots, not in a triumphant way, in a survival way. A notary arrives at 3:12 p.m., a woman with a stamp and a practiced smile. She sets her kid on the table like a medic setting down tools. The patriarch signs. The pen is cheap plastic again, blue ink, but the signature is the expensive part. The notary stamp comes down with its dull thunk, and the fee, $10, feels almost obscene compared to what it consecrates. Outside, the invisible workforce keeps the day moving. A field producer walks the property line with a clipboard, noting where vehicles can park so the cameras get a clean angle. A medic checks a bag and counts supplies. A sound tech tapes a microphone pack to a man's back and asks him to repeat a line louder because the wind is interfering. Two ranch hands, real hands, tighten a bolt on a generator mount. Their fingers black with grease because the generator doesn't care about plot. It cares about fuel and spark and maintenance. Somewhere in the paperwork stack is the old language of land control, easements, rights of way. A reminder that even a ranch can't fully lock itself. A utility corridor, maybe 30 feet wide. Access rules, the kind of fine print that turns private into complicated. The patriarch has quoted the law on his signs, Utah Code 766-206, but the law is a slow animal, and the night is fast. That's the new calculation. The ranch survives by making the hunt profitable even if it fails. They begin to price the dream. A hat with the ranch name stitched on the front, $35. A shirt, $28, costs $9 to print. The difference paying for fuel and locks and the kind of small repairs that keep a place functioning. Someone suggests a member tour. Carefully worded, no guarantees, no promises, just exclusive access. The lawyer's eyebrows rise. Liability blooms in his mind. So it becomes a filming day experience. Waivers signed, boundaries explained, a small line of revenue flowing in where gold never did. The ranch, once a hole in the earth, becomes a set of income streams, episode fees, merchandise margins, licensing, sponsorship. A flashlight brand wants placement. A tool company wants the men to use their shovels on camera. The patriarch nods to things he would have laughed at 5 years earlier because a man's pride changes shape when it's pressed by bills. Even the language of the hunt changes. They stop saying we're digging for gold. They say we're investigating anomalies. They say we're documenting activity. They say we're uncovering history. Words that don't require a payoff. Words that can stretch across a season the way a drought stretches across a summer. And the irony is that it works, because the public isn't buying gold. They're buying the feeling of being close to it. Close is the product now. Close is the engine. A month later, a check arrives, paper or direct deposit, it doesn't matter, and the ranch breathes. The mortgage gets paid, the insurance gets renewed. The excavator sits idle more often because digging is expensive and filming is cheaper. The land becomes less a place to excavate and more a place to maintain. Gates locked, cameras charged, narratives fed. And the patriarch, whose body has already begun to protest, blood pressure numbers like 182, 106 whispering consequence, finds a way to keep the dream alive without making the earth open its hand. Was this reinvention a kind of rescue, turning a failing hunt into a living enterprise? Or did the ranch just prove the oldest truth of American commerce? That you don't need to find treasure at all if you can convince enough people to pay for the feeling of chasing it? They say it's just a show, just entertainment. A strange corner of the American imagination where men play at curses and the audience plays along, safe on their couches, far from the cold. But the truth is that the show is only the newest mask on a very old face. America has always been a nation of holes. We dug for fur and left rivers empty. We dug for silver and left towns like skeletons. We drilled for oil and lit whole decades with it, then wondered why the air tasted wrong. We took the ground apart because we believed the ground was there to be taken apart. The myth says it's progress. The reality is extraction, raw, elegant in its simplicity. Remove value, convert to money, move on. Blind Frog Ranch is not an outlier. It is a mirror. Look at the cast of it, and you can see the whole machinery of the country laid out in miniature. There's the great man, the patriarch, capable, stubborn, brave, in the way stubborn men are brave, willing to risk his body and his name for a promise. And beneath him, holding the structure up, there's the invisible workforce. Ranch hands tightening bolts in the cold, camera crews hauling gear, medics watching quietly, wives managing households while the men chase a story, children learning to live around a dream that eats time. And then there's the market, the true author, deciding what gets funded and what gets abandoned. The gold story is just the bait. The curse is just the seasoning. The real meal is attention. Even the trespassers fit the pattern, because when you tell people there might be value in the ground, they come, not as ghosts, as men. Men who believe the rumor belongs to anyone who can reach it. Men who bring cutters and confidence and the darkness as cover. Men who turn private land into contested territory. Because America taught them that value is something you take, not something you ask for. The law sits in the background like an old book nobody reads until it's too late. Utah Code 766206 on a sign, 29 CFR 1926, Subpart P in a lawyer's mouth, the memory of older legislation like FLPMA 1976, shaping what can be claimed and what can be controlled. Paperwork trying to tame a hunger that has never been tamed, and the hunger keeps changing clothes. Once it wore a miner's pick, then a drill rig, then a bulldozer. Now it wears a camera and a release form and a brand strategy. The same impulse, just updated to a world where the most profitable ore is not metal, but belief. So you return, in your mind, to that first image. Night in the basin, diesel in the air, wind worrying the brush, halogen lights carving out a small, harsh circle in a vast darkness. A chain lowering into a hole, links cold and oily, singing when it goes taut. Men leaning forward, breath showing, listening for the earth to answer. It doesn't matter, finally, whether there is Aztec gold down there. Not in the way they think it matters, because the ranch already found a different kind of treasure the moment the story became valuable enough to defend. A treasure made of fear and hope and attention and the American willingness to pay for both. The patriarch stands at the edge of the cut, older than when he began, his body a ledger of stress. The son stands nearby, learning how to inherit not just land, but appetite. The workers keep working because work is what keeps the lights on. The cameras roll because cameras are the new picks and shovels. The night stays dark beyond the circle of light because the night always stays dark. And in that darkness, the same question waits, patient as the ground itself. Are we watching men dig for a curse, or are we watching America do what it has always done, turn a hole in the earth into a story, and a story into money, and money into the next hole?